A mother and son were taking a walk on the streets when a homeless woman asked them for something to eat. When the woman saw who it was, her heart was filled with emotion. This story will touch your heart, so stay until the end. Alice was a young woman who always dreamed of having a child. She and her husband João thought they couldn't have children, but after a few years, she became pregnant. Alice couldn't believe she was finally going to fulfill her biggest dream of becoming a mother, despite a risky pregnancy. She had medical care, but her delivery was very difficult and painful. João thought he was going to lose his beloved wife and son, but everything turned out fine in the end. After a few days in the hospital, mother and son were discharged to go home as everything was okay. Nonetheless, Alice would still be closely monitored to prevent any kind of problem. Alice had a beautiful son, Samuel, who was the pride of the couple. He was a healthy, energetic, and very intelligent young boy. Years passed quickly, and Samuel was growing up very well to the joy of his parents. João was a present father, faithful husband, and loved his wife very much. He was a true example of a man of character and a family man. João loved his son above all and did everything possible to ensure that he and Alice had a wonderful life without any problems. Thus, João closely followed the development of his only child. Samuel was already 12 years old, and unfortunately, life took his biggest role model, his father, away from Alice. It was an immeasurable loss in their lives, and it took a long time for Alice and Samuel to recover from this setback. More years passed, and Samuel was already 16 years old. He was very dedicated to his studies, always getting the best grades and pleasing his mother. He was a young man who helped at home and had no problems with anyone. Samuel had impeccable health, practiced sports, and had no bad habits. One day, a mother and her son were walking around the streets in their neighborhood, having fun like they used to do when the father was still with them. Alice, the mother, suggested they take a walk around the city, and asked if her almost adult son, Samuel, wanted to come along. She thought he might find it uncool, but Samuel loved spending time with his mom and saw no problem with it. They had a great time that afternoon, going to the mall, eating at a diner, and taking a stroll in the park. During their walk, they talked about how much they missed João, Alice's husband and Samuel's father, who used to be part of their family outings. They wanted to keep this special moment between just the two of them and keep João's memory alive. While they were walking, Samuel noticed a homeless woman feeding the birds with some leftover food. He was amazed by how someone so humble could share what little they had with the birds. Alice saw his reaction and he took some coins from his wallet to help the woman. Alice didn't mind at all and even gave him a few extra bills to give to the woman. Alice sat in the park and watched her almost adult son show empathy towards the less fortunate. She thought about how much Samuel resembled João in this aspect, as he couldn't stand to see anyone in need without doing what he could to help. This thought moved Alice deeply. When Samuel approached the woman and gave her the money, she looked up with a sad expression. But when she saw Samuel, she smiled at him. Samuel politely said, "Good afternoon," to her, and asked how she was doing. The woman replied that she was doing her best to get by, but thanked Samuel for his kind gesture and smiled at him. Samuel sat down next to her and started asking if she needed anything else. She replied that she had everything she needed there because she had already had everything in life, but unfortunately lost it. From a distance, Alice could see that her son had sat down next to the homeless woman and was watching them talk. She became a little worried because the conversation was taking a little too long, so she got up and walked over to where they were. Alice greeted the woman, who lifted her head and looked at Alice. At that moment, Alice was speechless because she recognized the homeless woman and could never have imagined that someone like her would be in that situation. The homeless woman did not recognize Alice at first, but Alice said her name and asked if she was Nurse Solange. Surprised that someone knew her name, Solange replied yes. Samuel was surprised to learn that the woman was a nurse and asked how his mother knew her. Alice became emotional seeing Solange in front of her, especially in those conditions. Solange was happy to see that someone knew her and asked who Alice was. Alice explained to her son that Solange had accompanied her throughout her pregnancy and saved her and Samuel's lives during childbirth. Alice had difficulty getting pregnant, and when she finally did, she had many problems. She had received support from one of the best doctors she had ever known, and Solange was the nurse who provided support to both the doctors and patients. Solange and Alice had become very close during this time, and a small friendship had developed between them. On the day of Samuel's birth, Alice had some complications, and perhaps only the baby would be saved. However, the doctor and nurse Solange did everything in their power during the surgery that lasted for hours and saved the lives of both Alice and Samuel. Solange personally took care of both of them for several days, juggling between them and several other patients at the hospital. It was a stressful time for everyone, but everything turned out well in the end. Alice and Solange stayed in touch for a few years, but due to work and studies, they grew apart and lost touch. Alice began to cry and Samuel became worried about his mother. Alice then asked Solange why she was in that situation. Solange thanked Alice for the moment and began to cry as well. During the time she cared for Alice, Solange had lost her husband in an accident and was left to care for her son alone. Despite her grief, she was able to continue working as a nurse and being a mother. A few years later, her son also passed away while they were on a trip due to a terrible driver causing an accident. These were difficult times for Solange, who also lost the movement in one of her hands. On top of that, her mother-in-law blamed her for the deaths of her son and grandson and, being an influential woman, tarnished her name, making it difficult for Solange to find work as a nurse. Her savings ran out, and she started living off of favors until no one would help her anymore, and people who she had helped turned their backs on her. For 16 long years, Solange's life was terrible, but she became accustomed to it. Even though she was living on the streets, she helped anyone who needed it, but eventually, few people would come near her, and only birds, cats, and dogs were her loyal companions. So, today was a unique day for her because it had been a long time since someone treated her with dignity. Samuel was the first person in years to give her a genuine smile and have the courage to sit down and talk with her. Alice was moved by everything and said she couldn't let Solange live on the streets. Solange asked about Alice's husband, and she said he had unfortunately passed away a few years ago. Alice was worried about Solange living on the streets, but Solange said she had been living like that for over a decade and that there was no problem, and that Alice shouldn't worry so much. However, Alice said she would come back the next day with Samuel to bring her a solution about her way of living on the streets. She made Solange promise to be in that little park the next morning. Solange was very happy about this, but she told Alice that she didn't need to worry about her because what she did for Alice and everyone else was from the heart and out of love for her profession. Samuel then interrupted and told Solange to trust him and his mother, and that everything would turn out well. However, before they left, Alice and Samuel bought food for Solange to keep her sustained until they came back the next day. As they were leaving, Alice was very sad because if it were up to her, she would take Solange home with her, but she wanted to prepare everything and not rush into anything. So she and Samuel had a serious conversation that night because they had inherited their father's estate, including some houses and rented apartments, but there was a small, vacant apartment that could serve as a home for Solange. Mother and son agreed to the idea and went to clean the apartment that same night. In addition, they bought plenty of food to leave there in the small apartment. They finished almost everything by dawn and slept there. As soon as the sun rose, Alice asked Samuel to wait for them there and went to fetch Solange. When she arrived at the square, Solange was there and was startled by Alice's presence, but at the same time she was very happy because she thought Alice and Samuel would never come back again since other people had done the same thing to her before, given her hope, only to never return. Alice said this time was different and helped her friend up. Since it was still early in the morning, there were few people on the streets, but even so, these people wondered what a fine and refined woman like Alice wanted with a homeless person like Solange. Solange noticed the looks and Alice asked her not to be bothered by these judgments. Solange said she didn't care about them. The two talked more on the way to their new home. Solange never imagined that Alice would accommodate her in the place they were heading to. When they arrived, Solange was frightened by the apartment and said she couldn't stay there because she couldn't afford something like that. Alice and Samuel laughed and Samuel said she could live there for as long as she needed. Solange didn't know what to say. She just burst into tears and thanked them for this chance that life was handing her. As the days went by, Alice gave Solange a real makeover, took her to a beauty salon, and transformed her life visually. In addition, Alice took care of getting all of Solange's documents so that she would have her full dignity back. A few days later, Solange felt like a new person, but she didn't like being a burden on anyone's life and went looking for a job. She got a simple job as a pharmacy sales clerk, which paid a modest salary, but Solange would be able to make her monthly grocery shopping. Later on, Alice knew of Solange's great potential and asked why she couldn't study and become a university professor. Solange knew it would be difficult because she hadn't practiced her profession in years, but Alice pulled some strings, talked to influential people, and a job interview was scheduled for Solange. It was a substitute teacher position at a large nursing school. Solange was very nervous, but wanted to participate in the selection. Incredibly, she had mastery over all the topics and subjects covered in the practical and theoretical tests, surprising everyone. Her score on the selection was maximum. Although she couldn't practice nursing, she could teach it, and that was wonderful for her. Solange began to believe that kindness still existed in some people's hearts, and nowadays she has a wonderful life again, thanks to her great friend Alice. Like the story? Share it, subscribe to the channel, and activate notifications so you don't miss any stories.
Mãe e filho andavam passeando pelas
Thanks for
ruas,
getting here.
quando uma moradora de rua lhe
Until
pediu
the
algo
next
para
story.
comer. Quando ela viu quem era a mulher, seu coração ficou emocionado. Essa história vai emocionar você. Fique até o final. Mãe e filho andavam passeando pelas ruas, quando uma moradora de rua lhe pediu algo para comer. Quando ela viu quem era a mulher, seu coração ficou emocionado. Essa história vai emocionar você. Fique até o final. Alice era uma jovem mulher que sempre sonhou em ter um filho. Ela